drug's so plentiful that you could really get it just about whenever and wherever. He offered this to me and said, this is going to make you feel the same exact way, and it's going to be a lot cheaper. I don't know why we haven't been doing this in the first place. Like, I couldn't be touched. All my problems were just gone. My morals and values went out the window, what I was raised with, you know. It was kind of whatever I had to do to get the drug, I would do it, and it doesn't matter who I hurt.
Heroin abuse has devastated so many families and small towns across the northeastern part of the United States. In Harford County, heroin has rocked our community with more than 200 overdoses in 2015. Today we're going to talk about a success story, Zack Trabbold. He's a 27-year-old executive chef from right here in Bel Air. He's fought back against heroin and has turned his life around. Let's hear Zack's story.
Grew up in a very normal family, raised by my mother. My father was in and out of my life, an alcoholic. I have one older brother. He's 3 years older than me. Always looked up to him. Very aggressive, I guess you could say. You know, my brother always, you know, tried to play like the authority role in my life, even at a young age. You know, I looked up to him though, and you know, he always played sports, so you know, I wanted to do what he did, and you know, I went to school and tried to do as best as I could, because you know, that's what I was taught growing up. And you know, my mother was very strict. You know, she was the type of mother that made sure, I grew up in the city, so when the street lights came on, you know, I better be inside or in the yard, or you know, I was gonna get a reprimand, I guess you could say, from my mom.
So Zack, tell me where things went wrong with you. Where did you, we talked a little bit off camera about prescription drugs, and that's kind of how you got your start. Tell me a little bit about how you went down that road of addiction.
So my brother and his friends, you know, always smoked pot and drank, and you know, like I said, I always wanted to do what my brother did, and you know, so I kind of looked up to him and his friends, and that's kind of, I guess you could say, where my introduction was. But it wasn't something that I thought I ever saw myself doing. It really, it looked a little bit attractive. The attraction was more towards the people, not towards the drugs or the alcohol. My dad was an alcoholic, and when my mother, she has bipolar disorder, and when she was diagnosed, she had some ups and downs, and that's kind of where it really took off. My dad actually came back into my life. My brother moved with him to another area in Delaware, and that's when we kind of had that freedom open up to us a little bit more.
So is there a point in time where you can pinpoint that the addiction process, not just heroin, but the addiction process started for you?
The behaviors, definitely. When I moved in with my father worked in radio his whole life and was a DJ, and was a very heavy drinker and drug user. But he was a functioning addict, I guess you could call it. And that's kind of where I think it kind of started for me.
Tell me about the first time you decided to make that decision and try heroin.
So I was already on prescription pills. You know, I got my start on pills because I was, you know, injured. A doctor just gave them to me, which there was no need for me to get them. Really, you know, I think I was, you know, 17 years old, getting a prescription of pills, and you know, I lost that prescription, and you know, my money, you know, at that time, you know, I'm still a teenager.
How old are you, Zack, at that time?
I'm 18, I'd say, when I started to try heroin, and you know, it was a lot cheaper than prescription pills. Pills were very plentiful and cheap in the beginning, and it didn't end up being like that, and I was introduced to heroin, and they said, you know, hey, this will produce the same effect, and it's a lot cheaper.
Who introduced you? Who was that person
My cousin.
that brought you to that?
Yeah.
And there was promises of feeling great, feeling this euphoria?
So I was already on prescription pills at the time, and he came to me, and we didn't have a lot of money at the time. And I've already had trusted him because he is my family, and we grew up together. My mom raised him for a little while, and it really, I'm going to be totally honest with you, it didn't take much convincing because I was sick, from the painkillers I've been using and abusing, and I was sick, and he offered this to me and said, this is going to make you feel the same exact way, and it's going to be a lot cheaper. I don't know why we haven't been doing this in the first place, type of thing, and I jumped right on it.
So how did you feel? What was the feeling? That first shot of heroin, I take it you injected it with a needle?
My first time, I just sniffed it.
You sniffed it?
Yes.
What was that feeling that you had?
Euphoria, like I couldn't be touched, like nothing, like all my problems, were just gone.
And how long did you feel that way?
For about an hour or two, and then my mind was on how do I get more and what do I have to do to get it.
So you had that feeling for an hour or two. Do you go on and use it again the next hour? How often were you using this?
At this point, I wasn't really using it, very regularly, but later on it would be 8, 12, 14 times a day, and that's using it with a needle.
And what about the feeling when you weren't able to get the drug, when you didn't have access to heroin? Tell me about that a couple months into using.
Well, I mean, you could always find it, as far as it's whether if you have the means to get it, but the drug's so plentiful that you could really get it just about whenever and wherever, it's about having the money. And at this time, I really didn't have the funds. I grew up in the restaurant business, so I usually had steady cash flow always coming in, but it wasn't until later on when I really started to, use it a lot more.
And using that drug, what changes did you see in yourself? I know you said the first time you felt that euphoric high, but over time, I imagine this has changed you physically and mentally and,
oh, absolutely.
and your health.
I mean, to walk you through like what it looked like was, a lot of weight loss, acne on my face, in and out of jail, and every time I went, to jail, I would come out and, I would look healthy again, and I kind of almost feel like, hey, I'm all right, but it wasn't necessarily like that, My morals and values went out the window, what I was raised with, it was kind of whatever I had to do to get the drug, I would do it, and it doesn't matter who I hurt.
Zach, we talk about jail. What were the reasons you went to jail for? How many times did you go to prison?
Numerous times. I violated probation probably 13 or 14 times. I've been incarcerated for burglary, robbery, theft, anything to do with stealing. I've done it to support my habit, and that's what the sole purpose was, to get high.
And tell me about that first time. What brought you to the point where you decided, I need more heroin, I've got to go steal something so that I can get this drug to feel better?
Well, it was kind of to the point where my family, like I said, I come from a pretty good family, and they really didn't want anything else to do with me. And there comes a certain time where you keep doing these things to your loved ones, and almost anybody's going to break ties with you. And I kind of would stop stealing from my family because in the beginning I knew they wouldn't do anything to put me in jail or hurt me or those type of things because they love me so much. And I figured I could do it to others, and that wasn't the case. I kept doing it, and really the fact of the matter is I just didn't care. Like when I was on heroin, it didn't matter what I was doing as long as we'll deal with the consequences later, because right now I need to make sure I'm okay. It's like so addictive that you don't think or anything, react when you're on it. It's like your next thing to do is like to get more drugs, and that's all that matters.
So you're in prison. There's no heroin there, of course. What's that feeling day 2 or 3 when you're behind bars and you haven't been able to get your fix?
Oh, it's horrible. It's the worst thing I've ever been through, coming in and, I was on a lot of benzos as well as heroin, and withdrawing from both of them at the same time was, intense. And, when I was incarcerated, there was 3 of us in a cell, and, I'm on a mat on the floor, and, just the hot and cold and sweating and, the restless legs and trying to get up and, walk around, but you're in such an enclosed area. It's like there's not much walking you can do, and just like the hopelessness, I guess you could say, like feeling completely empty, and the thing about heroin is when you're in jail, you feel like that. And, like I say this a lot of times when I share at meetings, is like, if you would have hooked me up to a lie detector test when I was locked up, I would have told you that I was going to stay clean this time when I got out. But the drug is so powerful that when I get out of jail, later on that night, I'm getting high because it didn't matter. It just took control of me.
When you were in prison, what services were there? Was there anybody there that you looked up to, or any services that they brought in to help you fight this addiction?
The prison I was in really didn't have too much at the time. They had some 12-step meetings come in, but, there was a lot of, I was in a pretty bad city prison in Delaware, and they really didn't have, there was always fights breaking out, and then they'd lock everybody down, and it just really wasn't a lot of services offered. My last incarceration, before I actually did an in-treatment program called Green Tree, and it was very helpful. And I told myself I was going to stay sober, that again. And I actually had a tragic event happen when I was incarcerated at that time. My father died when I was in jail as a result of alcoholism. He had cirrhosis of the liver, and like again, if you would have hooked me up to a lie detector test, I went to his funeral from jail with 2 guards, shackled up in an orange jumpsuit, and I told myself that I was never going to do this again, that I was done with it. And later on that night, I have a needle in my arm. Or not later on that night, but when I got out of jail that night when I got out, I had a needle in my arm that night.
What brings you to that point, Zach? What brings you to that point to you telling yourself when you're sober in jail that I'm never going back to this, I never want to feel this pain again, to then getting out and less than 24 hours after you've got your freedom, you can do what you want to do again? What brings you to that point to use again?
It's tough to say. I mean, it could be a lot of things. My brother picked me up and he handed me some money, and I was back in the environment I was in and where I used to use, and I feel like I had no solution in my life. It was kind of just, I was used to doing the same thing over and over again, and I almost feel like once I get put back in those surroundings that I'm used to, that it's like almost inevitable that I'm going to end up going back to it, and I feel like there's always a way you could, retract yourself from the surroundings you're in, and that's what I had to do to get sober.
You've been sober now for 2 years. What was that turning point in your life?
So my turning point in getting sober was, I overdosed one last time, and I've done it numerous times, and my cousin of mine that introduced me to heroin, it's actually a funny story. He introduced me to heroin, and he also helped me get sober. He came down here to Bel Air, Maryland, and he's also from where I'm from in Wilmington, Delaware, and he went to a treatment center, and then he went to a halfway house here in Bel Air, and he called me one day and told me what he did to get sober, and how life has changed for him, and just the positive outlook he had on life now. And I remember this was the guy that had the same outlook on life as me, and it was just great to hear, and I asked him, what do I have to do? And, he walked me through the steps of it, and, I went to an inpatient treatment center, which I've been to before, but I just had a little bit of willingness this time to change my life. I was tired of destroying everything and everyone around me. You know, my family was done with me. They didn't want anything to do with me. They tried helping me and put me in treatment before and, you know, bailing me out of jail. And, you know, my family wasn't even accepting my phone calls anymore. You know, and I finally was off probation, you know, and I felt like it was time for me to change my life. So I went to an inpatient treatment center. Then I went to a halfway house here in Bel Air, Maryland. And it was like on, you know, the path of recovery. And that halfway house was the turning point for me, I'd say.
How did you feel the day you walked through that door of that halfway house? Did you know in your mind that this is the day that I'm going to do it? No more heroin for me, ever?
I don't know if it was that, but it was definitely like, this could be my new life right here, type of feeling. Like, and when I walked into that house, I seen, you know, 10 other guys that were on that same path that I was on. And, you know, some of them were already there for a few months, so like you could see that change, you know, physically and mentally, you know, like, and it was awesome to see. You know, it was, to be honest with you, when I walked into the house, I thought some of them were on drugs because they seemed so happy. And I was like surprised to see people happy, you know, if they weren't using drugs or alcohol, you know. But it was amazing to see, you know, and they introduced me to the rooms of a 12-step fellowship, and, you know, it kind of just started trudging the road of recovery, and, you know, I kept moving my feet, and, you know, my life's changed dramatically.
Were there ever points in that time when you were in the recovery house that you felt, I need to go back to it, I need my heroin?
I mean, there are still points, even today, to be totally honest with you, where like, man, I would, you know, like to try that one more time. But, you know, now today I know what it's done, you know, and I know where my life is today, and it's just not worth it. You know, I have like these tools in my life now, and these great people in my life that, like, when I do get those crazy thoughts, that, you know, I call, you know, a couple friends of mine that are doing the same thing I'm doing, and you know, they let me know, like, what are you thinking? You know, this is insane thoughts, you know. And then I look at the overdoses that we have here in Harford County, and the friends that I've had die because of this drug, and it's just not worth it, you know.
So you came out of the halfway house about 2 years ago?
Yes.
Tell me how life's been since then. I know you're an executive chef, so you've gotten back into the trade, and, you know, every restaurant in Bel Air is trying to get you to sign up for their team.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been amazing. You know, I never thought, you know, I would have the opportunities I have today. You know, I'm a convicted felon. You know, I'm a habitual offender in Delaware. You know, but it's amazing. You know, I've worked for some great places. I've traveled, you know, all over the place in the U.S. the past 2 years, and, you know, paid for by companies I worked for. And, you know, I'm an executive chef again, which is phenomenal. And, you know, we started this nonprofit, the Turning Point Project, and, you know, I have a girlfriend and a dog and a house and a job, and, you know, these little things that, like, make life complete now is like something that I thought I'd never have, you know. I thought I wouldn't even live to be this old, you know, and it's amazing the gifts I have in my life today.
So would you say that you're much happier now than you ever were, even at your highest high? Absolutely. When you were on heroin?
Absolutely. You don't have to do drugs or alcohol. I don't drink. I don't do anything, you know, and you don't have to do those things to have fun. All the same stuff I do sober, I could have done, or I did when I was high, that I thought were so fun, you know, I could do sober, and it's amazing. You know, I take a ton of friends of mine and we go out on a boat and go fishing, or we go to theme parks or go to different events. Like, you can still do all these things sober and have a great time.
You've come a long way, Zach, from the lowest of low points in the addiction process, to stealing, to being in prison, to going through recovery, to putting your life back together. And now I know you've also formed the Turning Point Project with Bo, and you guys have put this nonprofit group together to put people like you into treatment facilities. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, like I said, when I went to my halfway house, my family was basically done with me. You know, they've tried to pay for me to get into treatment before, and I never listened to the, you know, the suggestions given by the counselors or the people at the treatment center to go to a halfway house. So this time when I went to a halfway house, you know, they weren't willing to help me pay for it, you know, and I had to figure it out. And Andy, the owner of the house I went to, found a foundation to help me pay for my stay at my halfway house. And I felt like when I talked to my partner Bo, it was like we were just going to do one event, and donate all the money to the halfway houses because I'm a chef and I was going to prepare the food. And Bo kind of came up with this thing like, well, I feel like we could help so many more people. And Bo's kind of like the mastermind behind the Turning Point Project. He kind of like, because I work so much in the industry I'm in, he really puts a lot of stuff into it. And it's been amazing. We've put two young males into halfway houses in a short 3-month period. We work with as many people in the community from Maryland Recovery or other halfway houses in the community trying to, help people or just outreach, more information about the epidemic of heroin and try to break the stigma, because I feel like, there's still a little bit of a stigma of people like it's not happening here or it's, looked down upon, instead of trying to, show people that there's a way up and a way out.
Tell me about your family. I know you'd mentioned earlier that, since you went down that road of addiction and theft and prison, they didn't want anything to do with you. What about today, Zach?
Well, I actually just celebrated 2 years last week, and my brother was there, his fiance was there, my mother was there, my girlfriend's parents came down, and they all live in, about an hour away, and they drove down, to hear me speak for an hour, and it was amazing. I'm there for my family today, and they're there for me. Holidays, I worked in the restaurant business, but, like Easter Sunday, I worked 4 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and I drove home to see them, because I could show up today, and that's what, recovery has given me, the ability to show up for my family, and not just for my family, just to be, it's all, like, I feel like being sober is, like, one of the biggest things for me is trying to do the right thing, regardless whether it's for your family or, little things, holding the door open for somebody or just saying thank you or hi or shaking somebody's hand. It's these little things, that I'm able to do today because I'm living right.
What's Mom think of her youngest son today?
She's so proud. I mean, she's ecstatic. She calls me more than I like her to call me. But, I mean, she's just ecstatic the things that, I have going on in my life, It's really a blessing, my whole family, her father, my grandfather is, calls me all the time. It's just cool to, like, look at your phone and, or to look at your phone and call them and they answer, and because I didn't have that before. And, I have it back in my life today, and it's really, really amazing.
Well, Zach, you've certainly come a long way at 27 years old, from the lowest of the lows to the highest of the highs, to destroying your life and then putting it back together and becoming even more successful than you even thought you could be. This drug has, been a plague on so many counties here in Maryland, across the country, with widespread use in the Northeast. What can you tell parents as a former addict, as a former person in recovery, to now someone who's in the nonprofit world trying to help people get out of this? What can you tell parents? What can you tell kids about this drug?
I would say to the parents to, not to enable your kids. The biggest thing my family did for me, which was, help me get sober, was, not enabling me, not giving me money, and not, turning a blind eye, basically. Like, don't ignore the problem because you don't think it would ever happen to your child, because it can happen to anybody, and if they do go to treatment, to listen to the people that work there. They work there for a reason, and I probably would have got this thing a lot sooner if, I would have listened to the people that worked in the rehabs that I went to, and for the young kids out there that are thinking about using heroin, I mean, there's not much you can say. It destroyed my life, and thank God I had an opportunity to put it back together, because not many people do. People die every day from this thing, and it's really, really scary. So.